Welcome students to Chapter 13, which concerns schizophrenia and related disorders. And these are clearly some of the most significant psychological problems that people can face. Schizophrenia is a form of psychosis, which is a state in which a person loses contact with reality in key ways. And when you develop full-blown schizophrenia, your personal, social, and occupational functioning deteriorate as a result of unusual perceptions, odd thoughts, disturbed emotions, and motor abnormalities. And 1 in 100 experience schizophrenia during their lifetime. There are 20 million worldwide, 3.2 million in the United States. It is equally distributed between men and women, and the age of onset tends to be 23 for men and 28 for women on average. In terms of diagnosing schizophrenia, we need to look for 1 month that an individual displays 2 or more of the following symptoms much of the time: delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, very abnormal motor activity, including catatonia, which we'll talk about later, and negative symptoms, which we'll also talk about later. At least one of these individual symptoms must be delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. The individual functions much more poorly in various life spheres than was the case prior to symptoms. Beyond this 1 month of intense symptomatology, individuals continue to display some degree of impaired functioning for at least 5 additional months. There are significant financial and emotional costs to schizophrenia. 25% attempt suicide and 5% die from this. There is increased risk of physical illness. It is found more frequently in lower SES groups, supporting kind of this downward drift theory. There are many clinical pictures. People have positive, negative, and psychomotor symptoms that vary from one person to another. Some clinicians have even argued that schizophrenia is actually a group of distinct disorders that share some common features. Positive symptoms are these pathological excesses or bizarre additions to a person's behavior. And we most often find delusions, disorganized thinking and speech, heightened perceptions or hallucinations, and inappropriate affect. For example, when a person hears something sad, they may smile. Positive symptoms, drilling down on these, the delusions can be single or many. They may involve persecution, ideas of reference, grandeur, or control. And again, it can be 1 or more. Positive symptoms also include disorganized thinking and speech. People can have loose associations where their speech really doesn't relate to the matter at hand. They can have neologisms or made-up words, perseveration where they repeat things over and over, and clang or rhymes where they group rhyming or similar sounding words, even though the words don't have any logical reason to be grouped together. They also may have inappropriate affect, as I said, where they have an expression that's situationally unsuitable. Positive symptoms include heightened perceptions and hallucinations many times. So there are problems of perception and attention. These perceptions are found in the absence of external stimuli, and they may occur together. Negative symptoms are pathological deficits. The first one is poverty of speech, or alogia, which is reduction in the quantity of speech or speech content. It may also say quite a bit, but a person may say quite a bit, but convey little meaning in what they're saying. They may have restricted affect or expression and show less emotion than most people. They may have avoidance of eye contact or an immobile or expressionless, kind of like flat expression. They may have loss of volition, which means motivation or directedness. They may have less energy and interest in normal goals, an inability to start or follow through on courses of action, ambivalence, meaning conflicted feelings about most things. They may have social withdrawal, have illogical or confused ideas. They may withdraw from the social environment and attend only to their own ideas and fantasies. Withdrawal does lead to social skill breakdown, including the ability to accurately recognize the needs and emotions of others, unfortunately. Psychomotor symptoms include awkward movements, repeated grimaces or facial expressions, and odd gestures. The movements seem to have a magical quality sometimes. Some symptoms may take extreme forms, collectively called catatonia. These are stupor, where a person just sort of sits and stares. Sometimes they have rigid posturing and excitement. This is experienced by about 10% of people with schizophrenia. The course of schizophrenia usually it begins between the late teens and mid-30s, and there are three phases. There's the beginning of deterioration, mild symptoms called the prodromal phase, the active phase when the symptoms become apparent, and the residual phase, which is a return to prodromal-like levels. The course of schizophrenia can last for days or years. Full recovery is more likely with people who had good functioning beforehand, whose disorder was triggered by stress, something with an abrupt onset, with a later onset, for example during middle age, or those who receive early treatment. Relapses are more likely during life stressors. Diagnosing schizophrenia, according to the DSM-5, we need to look for symptoms of the disorder to continue for 6 months or more, and people have active symptoms for at least one of those months and then show a deterioration from previous levels of functioning. There are other schizophrenia-like disorders in the DSM-5, for example, schizophreniform disorder and schizoaffective disorder that has like a bipolar component. Diagnosing schizophrenia, some researchers believe that there should be a distinction between a type 1 and a type 2, type 1 being dominated by positive symptoms and type 2 being dominated by negative symptoms. Biological views are the first way that theorists explain schizophrenia. They look at inheritance and brain activity as playing key roles. Genetic factors are certainly involved. This is called the diathesis stress perspective, and it does have research support. They look at relatives of people with schizophrenia, twins with schizophrenia, people with schizophrenia who are adopted, and they have noted a direct genetic linkage research in molecular biology. Biological views include the dopamine hypothesis, which was really the first biochemical abnormality that was proposed to account for schizophrenia. Certain neurons using dopamine do fire too often, producing symptoms of schizophrenia. Messages travel from dopamine-sending neurons to dopamine receptors on other neurons, particularly to the D2 receptors, and these get transmitted too easily or too often. This theory is based on the effectiveness of antipsychotic drugs and medications. There's an undesired reaction to these drugs that provided insight into the biology of schizophrenia along the lines of dopamine activity in Parkinson's disease symptoms. In recent years, there's been a challenge to the dopamine hypothesis because of a new group of antipsychotic drugs called the atypical or second-generation antipsychotics. They bind to D2 dopamine receptors and many D1 receptors and other neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, glutamate, and GABA. They're more effective than the first-generation drugs, and so they basically show that there are other receptors or neurotransmitters besides dopamine that are involved in schizophrenia. Also, we look at dysfunctional brain structures and circuitry in the studies of schizophrenia. There is a circuit that includes the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, amygdala, thalamus, striatum, substantia nigra, and other structures. And it has actually been divided into two substructures or subcircuits at this point. There are viral problems that may account in terms of exposure to viruses before birth that pass on an abnormal immune response that can produce schizophrenia. and the evidence for that is within animal model investigations. There are links involving late winter births and mother influenza exposure. So if you see here, these are some of the structures that are involved in schizophrenia in the brain, and these are the two sub-circuits that are involved over here on the right-hand side. There are other views of schizophrenia development as well, psychological views. There's a psychodynamic explanation from Fromm-Reichmann that there are schizophrenogenic mothers that account for schizophrenia. It's an elaboration on the Freudian view, but there is little research support for this. Self-theorists came along and said that biological deficiencies cause the development of a fragmented self. Cognitive behavioral explanations have been offered as well. Operant conditioning has been proposed, which has had some circumstantial support. More recently, it's being viewed as a partial explanation. And the idea also is that there are misinterpretations of unusual sensations, but there's no direct research support for that line of research at this point. This idea that there's a rational path to madness. Sociocultural views have been proposed as well, noting that racial and ethnic group differences exist in the rates of schizophrenia. African Americans are more likely than non-Hispanic whites to receive the diagnosis, and they're overrepresented in mental health hospitals. So the thought is that being more prone to the disorder might exist. There also may be biased diagnoses, there may be misread cultural differences, and there may be economic hardship effects that produce the stress that creates schizophrenia. Immigrants and native-born population differences have also been studied. There's a higher prevalence extending into second generations of immigrants. There's overdiagnosis in immigrant, racial, and ethnic minority groups, and stressors are unique to immigration, and discrimination occurs, which can again produce that stress that in turn produces schizophrenia. Social labeling has been studied by the sociocultural views. Features of schizophrenia are influenced by a diagnosis. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for some people, and there's a study that supports that by Rosenhan. Family dysfunction clearly has a link to schizophrenia. High expressed emotion is tied to relapse, and people with schizophrenia are often difficult to live with. Finally, there's a developmental psychopathology view where we apply an integrative and developmental framework to examining schizophrenia. And we do this with other disorders as well, but I wanted to highlight it for you for schizophrenia. It's where we look at the individual's genetic predisposition. It's implemented by a dysfunctional brain circuit. This eventually may lead to schizophrenia if, over the course of a person's development, there are significant life stressors, difficult family interactions, or other negative environmental factors. In this view, there are more details about the diathesis stress process in schizophrenia. And this slide really talks about how the process begins to unfold long before the actual onset disorder. Early problems result from this inherited disposition, but may also be due to repeated childhood stress experiences, the difficult social interactions, family dysfunction, that sort of thing. And there are key ways that this dysfunctional brain circuit may adversely affect the functioning of people who later become schizophrenic. You can see this slide where a person, starts out life in two different ways, but there is a genetically based brain circuit dysfunction, and then one person has a lot of different psychosocial problems, and another person doesn't have those same psychosocial problems. So the first person has schizophrenia and the second one does not. So this is concludes our discussion of schizophrenia, and I will pick up our conversation next in chapter